everybody, to Survive and Advance on the Grueling True Sports Network. I'm your co-host for Survive and Advance, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I want to welcome in my co-host, 1981 national champion, Steve Risley. Riz, we got to watch a football game last night on Monday night where I didn't fall asleep partway through the first quarter.
Tell you what, that may be our namesake. That game might have been Survive and Advance. I mean, it's like, holy cow, it's who was going to score last. I played in a high school game like that one time with our arch rivals in the state, and it ended up being 50-43. In a high school game, that's pretty good because you only play 12-minute quarters in Indiana. And both teams scored every possession they had the ball, and they beat us because they onside kicked us and we weren't ready for it. Other than that, it was lined up. They won 50-43, but it's the same kind of game where everybody was just clicking. And I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback because you're a football coach. I'm sure everybody's talking about there was no defense, but I think there was a lot of defense played last night. I think maybe defense won the game last night.
Well, I think there's no doubt.
Separated the winner from the loser.
Yeah, there's no doubt that it did. And this was the first game in league history in which both teams topped 50 points. It was the third highest scoring game in league history behind, I think, the 66 Redskins-Giants, I think it was, or Redskins-Bears, which was like a 72-41 game. And then the Bengals played the Browns in 2004 in a 58-48 Bengals win. And I just like to bring that up because the Bengals won, and that doesn't happen that often. But this game, of all this offense, was somehow decided in the end by punter Johnny Hecker and Travis Kelce struggling to sustain a block. The thing that stood out to me is what a punt, but also, I mean, what is Tyreek doing there? I mean, why are you catching a punt at the one? I mean,
and then running it out.
Yeah, the time is limited, and I know that he is a great punt returner who at any time can go to distance. But, I mean, chances are you're not there. And the only thing he did was they could have had the ball with around a minute 5 left, still had a timeout, bit on the 20-yard line, and instead they've got the ball, on their own 12 or 13-yard line.
12 or 13, somewhere in there, yeah.
Yeah, so he cost them 10 yards in 10 seconds.
And really, you consider a punt a defensive play. I mean, it's really a defensive play, so it was great, great defense there.
Well, see, I think I consider a punt a special teams play, and I think people miss this a lot, that a game is a third offense, a third special teams, a third defense. And when you look at it, I mean, a game like this, special teams decided a game, and how many times do we see a big game where special teams decides the game? And I think people the perfect example is this. I coach a high school team, and the thing is, you'll have a kid that maybe only plays 5 plays and are on special teams. And the parent will come up and say, my kid didn't play. I said, yeah, he played on special teams. And they're like, well, that doesn't matter. But it does, because special teams is a huge part of football and a huge part of whether your team wins or loses the game. And if you don't believe that, you can ask the Cleveland Browns, who if they could have made some field goals and played a little bit better on special teams earlier in the year, they may be relevant right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was just one thing that I know you don't, it's better to you this much, but they blew out the over-under in Vegas by over 40 points.
Yeah, what was
so Vegas took a pretty big hit.
I thought I read where it was the biggest over or under in NFL history, too.
61 points was the over-under.
Man, I wish I'd have known that. I'm not a betting man, but I may have bet
No,
on
I'm not either, but yeah. But no, it was 61 points I just read here, and they blew it out by 41 points.
Yeah, so
over-under.
The question becomes...
Yeah, the over-under was a strong 64, and they blew it out by 41 points.
Yeah, and
so the over-under was 54 points.
I think the question here has to come. We hear all this about Patrick Mahomes, but Jared Goff, 31 for 49, 413 yards, 4 touchdowns, and I think the deciding factor in this game is no interceptions. And you can say
versus 3.
Yeah, you could say, well, he's got Todd Gurley running the ball. That's why. But Todd Gurley only carried the ball 12 times for 55 yards. If you flip this around, everybody's freaking out because Mahomes is 33 for 46, 478 yards, 6 touchdowns. But the difference in this game is this. Mahomes threw 3 interceptions. And in the end, that was the difference in this game was that Jared Goff took care of the ball better than Mahomes. I know Mahomes was desperate at the end of the game, just throwing the ball around. But if you want to win a Super Bowl, you can't desperately just throw the ball around.
Did it seem like to you that the Chiefs, while they were playing great, but they were kind of always playing catch up almost the entire game?
Yeah, and I took the fourth quarter as they were panicking and the Rams weren't.
Right, but they were playing catch up, and I think that has a lot to do with 3 picks. Because 2 of the picks were long bombs that were just underthrown bad balls. But, the last one, you can't even count it. He's just trying to make a big play at that point in time. He's got no timeouts and trying to throw the ball 70 yards. But I just felt like, in reviewing the game and getting ready for today, I thought, if you look at the game, really, Kansas City was always playing from a position of behind. So they're kind of forced to take more risks than the Rams were. But, I got to give it to the Rams. Offensively and defensively, they dominated the game. They flushed Mahomes out of his pocket quite a bit. They have a lineman that makes an incredible play right off as he's getting blocked, puts one hand up and deflects the ball and just rips it right down and runs for a touchdown. Runs over Mahomes. God, I thought he was going to kill Mahomes. It's like if I was Andy Reid, I'm like, dude, let it go. Don't be trying to make that tackle. But it was. The question I have for you, is this one of the greatest games ever played in the NFL, or was it just a great game?
Well, this is the thing. I think a lot of times the latest is the greatest. It's how it always is. It's just like, LeBron James is the greatest basketball player that ever lived.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
No, he's not. He's just not. All right?
Yeah.
Give me Magic, Larry, MJ all day over him. He's still a great player. But he's not the greatest ever. The only time that I've agreed with this was, if you remember, what was it, Villanova, North Carolina in the NCAA championship game a few years ago? That was a game where I watched it, and then when I sat down after the game and I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, this may be the greatest college basketball championship game I ever saw. But when I sit down and I look at this, you have to think that this is one of the greatest games. And if it wasn't the greatest game, it may be the funnest game that we've ever seen.
Yeah, I think it's the funnest game. And you and I texted last night after the game preparing for today, and I told you, sadly, there probably will not be another game this great in the NFL this season. It's so hard to get a game like this put together where the score is just jumping back and forth, and everybody's making defensively, offensively, special teams, everybody's making fabulous plays. There really was nothing wrong about this game. I can't even really fault Mahomes for 3 picks, like I said. They were great defensive plays that got him, or it was desperation at the end of the game. So there was really no flaw in this game that I can think of whatsoever, except the dumb guy at the end, the Chiefs that ran the ball out. At that point, you're right. Take a knee, get the ball with no time off the clock on the 20, or they take a 20 or 25-yard line and touchback now.
I think it's 25. So
that's an
even bigger difference, because I was taking 20 because I'm still living.
I think it's 25, but don't quote me.
Yeah,
I know.
I think it is. It is.
I think it's a 25 now, but it was definitely normally I don't get my wife to sit and watch an entire Monday Night Football game, and we were trying to get ready to watch Dancing with the Stars because it was the finals.
Of course you were.
I'm thinking, man, this game needs to get blown out here so I can get over to Dancing with the Stars. And it didn't happen. She's like, don't change the channel. We got to see who wins this game.
Hey, Steve, did you hurriedly set your VCR to tape Dancing with the Stars?
No, I'd already had it taped. I knew that. But, you see, the problem is you get on Twitter, and if you get behind, you find out who wins before the show ends. So you kind of like to watch those kind of shows live.
Well, don't get on Twitter then.
Yeah, I know.
It's not that hard. You're that addicted to social
today.
Media that you can't give it up for an hour.
So let me ask you this about the game. How big was it that they moved the game to L.A.? Because the place was packed. They had an incredible ceremony pre-game. It was a beautiful night. Would this game meant as much if it was played in Mexico City, or the fact that it was played in the Coliseum?
I'll tell you.
And there were a lot of red in that stadium too.
Oh yeah,
there was
a
lot of
Chiefs
red
fans, and I'll tell you, I think this. I don't know if it affects the game. I don't know unless you go to Kansas City and it's bad weather. I don't think anything. These teams are fairly evenly matched. They're both well coached, even though I think there was some mistakes made in the last couple minutes by both coaches with clock management. Um, the big difference here is just the atmosphere. It was more electric, and as a player, I think that jacks you up even more. It's like if you come out and you're playing Kentucky at Assembly Hall in 1981, well, that's different than playing at a neutral site in Louisville against Kentucky. You know, the crowd will be 50-50, but it's still not the same thing. So overall, when I look at this game, I think it definitely shows that they're two of the best teams. I still think the Saints are a better team than both of them, but not by much. And I think what you're looking at is, I think right now you would have to say you're going to have a Chiefs-Patriots in Kansas City, and you're going to have Rams-Saints somewhere, and those are your two championship games, because to me, when I look at those four teams, outside of the Patriots, the other three are by far the three best teams, and then you got to throw in the Patriots for the intangibles of Belichick and Brady. Outside of that, I mean, I don't see anybody else that's going to crack the playoffs and make a conference championship game. There's nobody in the NFC, I think, that's going to sniff this. I think the only team with a chance would be, and this may sound nuts because Mitch Trubisky's the quarterback, but the Bears defensively are really good. They can run the ball, so maybe they can limit the possessions for the two teams in the NFC. But other than that, I think we're just headed for a great second game between the Rams and the Saints. And as you said, it's going to be hard for any game to live up to what we saw last night. But a lot of that game, the other thing is, and I remember talking to you, I think, during the game, and no, wait, it was one of my other friends who didn't see the start, but the thing that stood out to me was the first drive by the Rams. They throw a pass, they complete it at the 5, and it gets knocked away on a hit to a receiver. And they called it a hit on a defenseless receiver. The guy had got the ball in his hands. The Chief comes, hits him, and knocks it loose, and he gets a penalty for it. And I don't understand how you can penalize a guy for hitting a guy, knocking the ball away, and then say that guy was defenseless. So now we're at a point in the NFL where you've got to let this guy catch the ball and then tackle him. And I think that is one of the reasons why you get a game like you had last night, because of the rules and the lack of aggression, which is also why I'm going to bring up in a second a few NFL games that I think were better games, just because it was a little fair to the defense back then. It made it a little hard on the offense.
Let me ask you this. So is this game kind of a product of what I call it the juice baseball theory of NFL now? Because they're getting so protective about defensive hits, about trying to take contact out of the game almost. You know, and I know they got to be protective and they've got to be safe. I get all that. I'm glad that they're making a move that way, because we're learning more and more about CTE and all the problems associated with, you know, helmet-to-helmet hits and things. But is this getting to a situation now where games like this are going to become more the norm? Because, I mean, really, the Saints are running scores up, too.
I think they already are.
Are we giving the quarterback too much leeway? If you give a quarterback, are we giving quarterbacks too much firepower and the defenses can't have any defense against them?
Well, and this all started in the mid to late 70s with the Mel Blount rule, which then made it so up until that time, I don't think people realize if you go mid-70s and before, an NFL defensive back could hit a wide receiver until the ball was in the air. And I think that's the way the game should be played anyways, but it's not. And, yeah, I think it's a product of it. And we've seen a ton of games like this year. Not exactly like this, but you had the Rams-Saints game, which was 45-35, which was an outstanding game also. But I think that, to me, like I said, when I look at games, when I was watching the game, I have seen a Monday night game when it was better. And to me, that Monday night game would have been the 1978 Love You Blue game with the Houston Oilers and the Miami Dolphins. I think Bob Greasy threw for like 300 and some yards. Earl Campbell runs for close to 200.
How many?
You know, you get the Astrodome with the Love You Blue blaring in the background, and it was a great atmosphere like last night was, but it was a harder hitting game. And at 38-35, there was still defense in the game. And to me, I mean, when you watch that game, you had one team that was doing it through the air, the other team that was doing it on the ground. Plus, you had Howard, Frank, and Dandy Don. So, I don't even think it's the greatest Monday night game I saw because that one's up there for me. And then another one that would be up there. I don't think it was better than this one, but another one that would be up there would be the 48-47 Washington Green Bay game in 1983, which I think was played at Lambeau Field. It was either Lambeau Field or Milwaukee County Stadium, which that was an outstanding game too. I would put that game below this because the Packers team that year, they could score a lot of points, but they weren't a great team. They didn't make the playoffs. The Redskins were the highest scoring team in NFL history at the time in 1983, even though they came up short in the Super Bowl against the Los Angeles Raiders. And when you bring up that Raiders team, the last time I saw a crowd in L.A. that was that emotional and into a game was probably the 83 Raiders when they played the Seahawks in the NFC Championship game, because people forget, outside of that year with Raider fans in L.A., half the time they would only have 60 or 70,000 people in a 90,000 seat stadium.
Right.
So I think with the rules and everything, I think the 78 Houston-Miami is still the funnest Monday night game I saw. And I know people will say that's just because you're old as dirt and want to go back to 1978. And yeah.
Oh, I remember that game. I remember because I was a big Earl Campbell fan. And I remember singing, Houston Oilers, Houston Oilers.
Sing it,
Houston.
Steve.
I remember the song. I can't sing it. I just remember that. I remember the tune, but I can't sing the song.
And the other thing about that 78 game is they actually had a rematch in the AFC wildcard playoffs, so that was two playoff teams. And it wasn't near as good as the original game because I think the Dolphins lost the game like 17-9 or something.
It was Bum Phillips coaching, wasn't it?
Yeah, Bum Phillips against
his cowboy hat, his big cowboy hat on.
Yeah, Dan Pastorini, who was the man's man, Dayton Penthouse Models, racing funny cars and stuff later on. And I mean, you just had so many personalities. Robert Brazil, who we've had on the show before, who played in that game. I mean, there was multiple Hall of Famers in that game. You had Bob Greasy. There was just a lot of talent there. And overall, to me, it was just a funner game. And I think it was a better played game.
They were both fun games. I mean, they were both. Last night was a very fun game. I mean, but I think it is interesting. I'd like to see the stat, and you can probably pull this up. Is this probably now the highest scoring average of teams? Because I mean, like the Colts. Look at Luck. Luck is having all of a sudden a great year in the NFL. Look at they're putting up 35, 40 points a game now too. And the Colts are not considered a great offensive team. You got a great quarterback.
I don't know, but I don't think I have to look it up to think this is maybe, if it's not the highest scoring season in NFL history, it's up there. I mean, if you look at it, last night was also the first time this late in the season you had teams from different conferences play each other that were averaging over 30 points a game.
Right.
And, I mean, you even look at this, it trickles down. I mean, college football, high school football now, you see games every weekend. Ohio State, Maryland was 52-51. I mean, you see high school games that are scored in the 40s. And it's just the way the game's played, the safety issues, which I have no problem with. I'm not complaining about that at all because I want everybody to be safe. Yeah. I'm just comparing the games. And the game I would compare this to, and why I compare it is it's a similar score of a game, but it was different times. Would have been Week 3, 1989. The Buffalo Bills beat the Houston Oilers at the same Astrodome we just talked about, 47-41. The thing about that game is Warren Moon and Jim Kelly both topped 330 passing yards. Now, to put things in perspective or context here, this was just one of 6 games during the entire 1989 season in which both quarterbacks topped 300 yards. And when you look at their stats, Kelly did throw 5 touchdown passes. But Moon actually only threw 1 touchdown. He threw 2 interceptions. And there was late game swings in the game. But I just want to bring this up in context, the fact that those 2 guys throwing for over 300 yards was probably rarer than what we saw last night now.
Yeah, but both guys throwing over 400 yards.
Yeah. I mean, back then, 300-yard passing games were a huge deal.
Yeah, and I just looked it up. The Colts are averaging 29.8 points a game at 5-5.
Yeah.
So that kind of tells you where this is going. And like I said, to me, it's okay because I think that there's a lot of entertainment in football and sports professional. But I go back and say it's my theory of it's the juice ball theory for football is limit the defense what they can do, and get scoring in the game, because everybody's going to tell you last night was either the greatest game they've ever seen, it's the greatest game of Monday Night Football, or it's one of the funnest games. I mean, that's what the NFL wants. And, you know, I'm sure their viewership was up. I'm sure it's a ratings boon for them last night. It put a lot of thought process back into the playoffs and get people more excited about things. So, you know, there's a methodology to their madness, I'm sure.
To put this into perspective, if you look at the average points scored by teams, when you go to the top and you scroll down, there are only, let's see, we got the Jaguars average 18, the Raiders 17, Tennessee 18, Buffalo 14, Arizona 15. There are only 4 teams that average less than 20 points per game scored.
Yeah.
I mean,
think they brought that out last night.
The Chicago Bears are averaging almost 30 points a game.
Yeah. But they brought a stat out.
Dude, the Saints are averaging 38. The Chiefs are averaging 37, and the Rams are averaging 35.
Right. And like I say, you got 5 and 5 Colts averaging 30, 29.8.
Yeah. The Steelers are averaging 30, 29.9.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a bunch of teams, right? Yeah, so it's a big deal. But it was interesting. They brought up a point, and during the game or after the game, I think I was reading on Twitter, where they said that the whole season the Buffalo Bills have scored 13 touchdowns, and last night in that game there were 14 touchdowns in the game last night.
Wow.
And Buffalo's only scored
the thing that's most amazing is the Bills have won 3 games that way. I mean, this league is so, we've talked before whether it was mediocrity or parity. I mean, it's mediocrity with a lot of offense mixed in, because this is
the offense is covering the mediocrity, I think. I think it's kind of, the rules are kind of blending out the mediocrity, making the high scoring, so people think a lot of great things happen.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not complaining, because it's fun to watch. And, I mean, in the end, it's safer. You know, it's probably safer to have a game that is based more around passing the ball than it is running the ball. You know, if you're an offensive lineman, you're kick-stepping, you're not leading with your head or your hands and going in and bumping into another guy that's 300 pounds.
So that's a good question. I meant to ask you. I was going to ask you this because, again, you're coach. And should football do away with the kickoff? Should they just, you know, take that away from the game and just say, hey, you score, you get the ball on the 30-yard line?
I think that they pretty much have. I mean, because right now where they kick off from, there's not that many kick returns in the NFL anymore, is there? I mean,
no, it's like if it just gets in the end zone, is it an automatic touchback if it gets in the end zone, or are you still allowed to run it out?
High school, it's an automatic.
Automatic?
Yeah. But if you look at this, I'm trying to find some kick return yards, the kick return leaders.
No, there are not many kickoff returns back. But I think what it does, it takes away the element of the onside kick. Is one of the downsides if you eliminate that.
I think it's a huge downside, because I can tell you this: when I first started coaching football, I coached junior high football in Ohio, and if you were down 2 touchdowns and there was a minute and a half left, you'd lost. Because you scored a touchdown, they're just going to take a knee. So I don't think kicking should be eliminated. I think it should be put back 5 yards so they return it more. The most dangerous thing in the kick game was when they used to be allowed to do the wedge return. They did away with the wedge return, and once they did that, I think you see less and less injuries on the kickoff teams. I mean, the wedge is something dangerous. You get a bunch of guys basically as a battering ram just running into people. So when I look at that, I think the way that they've done that has helped. So, but I still think that the kick return is one of the most exciting. I mean, we talked about the old Houston Oilers. I mean, who doesn't remember Billy White Shoes Johnson?
Yeah. Or Devin Esther.
Yeah. The kicking game is one of the most exciting things there is. And right now, the team that leads in kickoff return yardage are the LA Rams, who have 32 kick returns. So that's about 2 or 3 a game. It looks to me like the league average is probably about 1.5 to 2 kick returns a game for each team. So you're getting, and with the amount of touchdowns we're getting in games now, you're probably getting 10 kickoffs. So maybe 20% of all kickoffs are returned.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just pulled that number completely out of my ass, so don't quote me on it. But
all right.
That's
no,
I
meant to ask you that question because I know they were talking about it again last night about just eliminating kickoffs entirely, and I don't think they should. I think you're making the game. Football is a contact sport. I think you just need to teach people to tackle better and to
yeah, but it's hard to teach people to tackle better if you're not tackling.
Yeah.
And they don't tackle in practice. They tackle very.
They don't tackle in practice, right?
I mean,
it's interesting. I brought it up too last night. I saw Gurley a couple times on a couple runs. He lowered his head.
Yeah.
I mean, Gurley was running powerful last night, and I'm thinking, man, I'll tell you what. I just watched that play, and Gurley just lowered his helmet and caused the helmet contact. I mean, he ran into the defensive back. He lowered his head just before impact, and they hit helmet to helmet. Do they not call it on offense? Is it only a defensive penalty?
They're supposed to, but
well, I tell you, they missed a couple of them on Gurley last night. I just noticed a couple obvious times. It was kind of an open field tackle almost, where he had broken through the line and picked up 12, 14 yards and was in more an open field situation.
They're supposed to call it, but I have very rarely seen it called.
I have not seen one called on a running back yet for lowering his helmet and going into a defensive player. But I saw Gurley do it. I don't say he didn't intentionally. I think it's a natural move. It's kind of how you coil up for contact.
Yeah, but this is the thing. It's the way Earl Campbell ran, and his career lasted 6 years, and his life has been rough since he's been post-football.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Man had thighs bigger than most people's waists.
Yeah. And, heck, most of the guys that hit him in the thighs had bigger concussions than you would have hit him in the head.
I think Earl Campbell was one of the greatest running backs ever to play the game. It's just he just didn't play long enough to get the statistics.
That's why he's in the Hall of Fame.
Runner.
It's the same thing with a guy like Gale Sayers or Barry Sanders or Terrell Davis. I mean, Terrell Davis was NFL MVP as a running back, won a Super Bowl MVP, and for 3 years he was maybe one of the top 3 or 4 running backs that ever lived. So you can't really keep him out when they're a running back. And really, I don't think you can keep anybody out that for 3 or 4 years is the best in the entire game anyways, especially when you're letting guys in who just put up big numbers because they played forever.
Earl's in the Hall of Fame, isn't he?
Yeah, Earl's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
I think he was first ballot, too.
Yeah, well, he should be. He played at Texas, didn't he?
Yeah. University of Texas. Lost to Notre Dame in the 78 championship game or 77 championship game.
Yeah.
You remember Notre Dame was a big underdog. They had to go to Cotton Bowl in Texas, and they came out and beat them like 38-10, I think it was. They blew Texas out that game.
Was that Devine and
Dan
Darrell Royal? And Darrell Royal?
No. Texas was, I think, was it John Mackovic?
Darrell Rogers?
It could have been. I was thinking Mackovic, but I don't know. Hold on here. That's why God gave us Google.
Darrell Royal.
That's why God gave us Google. Relax. I'll figure it out.
I know.
Instead of sitting here, I'll just let everybody know I'm Googling it. 1970. Fred Akers, that's right. Because Fred Akers, I think, came in after Darrell Royal.
Okay.
And I think that was the 78 Cotton, but it was the 77 season. But I'm not sure. But that was the team for Earl Campbell. I think they went into that game ranked number 1 also. But that was a great Texas team, and Notre Dame just took them apart. Ooh.
78 quarterbacking, would that have been Montana was already gone?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't gone.
It was Montana?
Pretty sure it was, because Montana had the chicken soup game in 1979 in the Cotton Bowl where he got sick. Remember, they were down 34-12. They gave him chicken soup or something at halftime, and he came out, and they had
I remember that.
The first that people remember of the Joe Montana epic comebacks, which at the time I was a Notre Dame fan and I loved, but then I learned to really hate Joe Montana for that a few years later. Yeah, I really hated him.
Well, last night was a good football.
That 77 Notre Dame
it was good for the NFL. I mean, it really, like I said, it'd be very hard to duplicate that game for a few years. Games like that are very special games. They don't come around very often. They just kind of just happen, and this one kind of just happened when you think of the movement of taking the game out of Mexico City, bringing it here. scheduling matchup, getting these two teams to play each other in the regular season. Both quarterbacks having great nights, big defensive plays. I didn't see a lot of coaching screw-ups really anywhere, no really bad decisions in coaching moves.
I still think McVay made a huge mistake passing the ball on second down.
Well, he tried to give the game away at the end. In the last drive where he threw the ball, 13 seconds came off the clock.
Yeah.
Well, they had to punt it back.
Alrighty. So.
All right.
Yeah, it was a great game. We'll just leave it at that.
Well, let's move on real quick, and let's talk briefly about the weekend in college football and the playoff implications. Nothing much happened. I know you got an opinion you want to share with some of the way the rankings should be done.
Well,
I still think it's the same four teams there.
I think with a few upsets now, I think UCF could possibly break into this. It's going to depend on what happens tonight when the rankings come out. But I know the AP and the other rankings actually had UCF jump Ohio State, LSU, and West Virginia this week, which I think is a huge positive for them. Because if you look right now at the college football rankings, and this is from CBS Sports, they actually have UCF up to number 8 now. Washington State's at number 6. I think Washington State is becoming relevant really quick. And
I
watched them the last couple weeks. Defensively, they're pretty good. And I just hope in the end that loss to an average USC team doesn't bite them in the ass. When you look at Georgia, they're going to play Bama. That'll be 5-1. And the question is going to be, if Bama beats Auburn in the upcoming rivalry game, and Georgia beats Alabama, then all of a sudden, maybe you have a spot for them. Or if Michigan loses to Ohio State or Notre Dame loses to USC, I think Clemson still plays South Carolina. And the thing is, we all know this. You played in rivalries at IU against Kentucky and Purdue. In rivalry games, you can kind of throw out the records of what you think because anything can happen.
Oh, no doubt. I've always believed that big time. When we played, we played Purdue 9 times in my 4-year career at IU. We never won at Mackey Arena. They never won at Assembly Hall. And it didn't matter who was the higher-ranked team. We just couldn't beat each other on each other's court. So I definitely believe fully that you throw out a lot of stuff when big rivalry games like this come on. It's a pretty emotional game. Michigan, Ohio State, I think really right now, I think Notre Dame may be sitting on the easiest path into the playoffs. All they got to do is come out to South Carolina or Southern Cal out here and beat what seems to be the kind of hapless Trojans because they just lost to UCLA. But like you said, it's a big rivalry game, and USC can, up their season by winning this game, knocking them out. Because if they lose, they're out of the playoffs. Notre Dame will be out. But then if they also lose, does that make Washington State more relevant? Because now USC climbs in stature because they beat Notre Dame, and then Washington State loses to a tougher opponent rather than a hapless USC.
Yeah, and I think
a lot of implications coming up.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Clemson, they don't have an easy schedule, and I know people say you're crazy, but people say that to me all the time. But when you look at it, Clemson will have to play South Carolina. It is at home, but it is a rivalry game. Then they go to Pitt. And going to Pitt, Syracuse lost at Pitt. Pitt's not a terrible team. But then again, they play Pitt probably the next week in the ACC championship game. So it's not extremely difficult. I just think the at-Pitt game could be dangerous for them on the road. But I think this thing that stands out to me is I don't know why Notre Dame's ranked below Clemson. When I look at Clemson's schedule, they beat Furman. They beat Texas A&M, but only by 2 points at A&M. A&M is not ranked. They beat Georgia Southern, who, of course, is not ranked. They beat Georgia Tech. They beat Syracuse 27-23. Notre Dame beat Syracuse 36-3. Clemson blew out Wake Forest. Notre Dame blew out Wake Forest. They blew out NC State, which at one point NC State was ranked, but not anymore. They blow out Florida State. Well, so did Notre Dame. They bludgeoned Louisville, but who doesn't? They had a nice win against number 20 Boston College. They beat Duke, who's unranked, and then they play 3 more games against unranked teams. When I look at Notre Dame, when you look at them, they beat number 4 Michigan right there. When you look at the body of work, Notre Dame should be ahead of Clemson. I mean, they've got a win against Michigan. They had some close games against Ball State and Vandy, but Clemson had some close games they shouldn't have had. They put 56 on Wake Forest, which is an ACC team. They blew out Virginia Tech at Virginia Tech, which Virginia Tech's not ranked, but it's a blowout win against an ACC school. They've already beaten Pitt, who looks like they're going to play in the ACC championship game against Clemson. They blew out Florida State. They played number 22 Northwestern, beat them at Northwestern. And the thing that stands out there to me on that is the fact that, I mean, Northwestern's going to play in the Big Ten championship game. Then you get to win. They beat Syracuse 36-3. Syracuse ranked 12th when they did it. And now they're going to go to USC, which USC is not normal USC. But still, it's a rivalry game where they got to go to the West Coast and play. And USC is a team that has beaten, a Washington State team that people have a lot of respect for. They lost to Utah, who's a very good team and ranked. They lost to Arizona State, beat Oregon State, lost a close game to Cal. I don't know how they lost to UCLA. And the thing, we talk about rivalry games. How far has that rivalry dropped? I didn't even know they played until now.
Who, USC, UCLA?
Yeah, and that used to be, if you remember, they would have, I think it was Ohio State, Michigan on, and then they would have Oklahoma, Nebraska.
Yeah, they'd go to the West Coast.
They'd go Oklahoma, Nebraska, and then that evening you would have USC and UCLA.
Right, yeah.
I mean, that was the big rivalry weekend triple header, so that has dropped off the map. Hopefully they can get it back together because it's a good game because their uniforms on a natural grass field looks really good together. So that's why I like to watch that game because I like it to be aesthetically pleasing also, Steve.
Yeah, my wife works about 10 minutes from where they played that game. She works about 10 minutes from the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
You see it every day she goes to work. She drives
what's
right by
your opinion? I know Clemson's got all these guys that are supposed to be studs. They got Trevor Lawrence. But to me, when you look at body of work here, I don't know how the selection committee right now can justify keeping Clemson ahead of Notre Dame.
Well, I think this. If it's a popularity contest, it's not going to change. But if it's an analytical, and it's supposed to be more analytical now, the actual football playoff rankings or whatever it's called, it's not the BCS anymore, so I didn't call it the BCS.
That is the first show we've ever done where you didn't say BCS at least once.
I know, I didn't, and I was being conscious.
I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you.
It's supposed to be more analytical, and there's supposed to be more statistics thrown into the ranking rather than just call 100 coaches or 100 writers and send your vote in who you like, because a lot of people just don't like Notre Dame still, and I think that hurts them publicly. But I think if you're doing it analytically, I would say Notre Dame's got to move to number 2 over Clemson. And I think in the final poll, should everybody win out and you end up with these 4 teams, I think Notre Dame should be number 2 behind Alabama.
If we have these 4 teams, I think it's absolutely insane if Notre Dame is beating the number 4 team for Notre Dame not to be there. And really, I hate to sound crazy here, but if they've beaten one of the top 4 teams, look at Bama's schedule. How does Bama get number 1 over Notre Dame?
I'll tell you what about Notre Dame. I've watched Notre Dame religiously. I've watched, this is my favorite team to watch, college football team. That team is improving every game. They're getting better.
Yeah.
I mean, they're winning against better opponents now. Like you said, they got into a tussle with Ball State in some early games, but now they're taking on some teams that are respectable, and they're dominating those teams. And they're not winning by slim margins. They're winning by large margins against more respectable teams they did early in the year. They're getting better. All right? Notre Dame may just be a surprise as to how good they really are. And I think we're kind of overlooking them because they don't play in a conference. They don't play in a conference tournament.
Well, I think also we're overlooking them because of past history. If you look at it, when they lose, they lost 45-14 the last time they let them in a situation. And that was the BCS championship game, I think, at the time. It was before the playoffs, and that was 2012 or so. And they went out and they just got humiliated. And in 45 or 14 or whatever it was, the game wasn't that close. Because I remember...
No, 24-0 in the first quarter.
Yeah, it's one of the few national championship games that I turned off like 10 minutes into the game because I knew this wasn't a game. And then you throw on top of that, and we talked about this for the last month, well, you know they're going to slip up and lose a game that they normally lose.
I know. I just can see it happening.
Yeah, and if Notre Dame wants to be relevant the way they were at one point on a national stage, and I know they've got their own television network and all that, but when people think of the best programs right now, you think of you think of Alabama, you think of Clemson. Those are the guys that pop into your head. When it was 1977 and you said, pick me the two best programs, I'm probably saying Notre Dame, Alabama. In that order.
And I'm probably at 77. I'm probably throwing USC in there too.
Yeah, you're throwing USC in there, but right now,
and you're throwing Oklahoma and Nebraska into that time too.
Yeah,
so but other teams, in '77,
well, Texas also,
Texas and Michigan. I mean, yeah. So it's changed. The landscape's changed. But I agree. I mean,
when you think about that landscape, why did that change? Because it used to be back in the day. You could tell who the top 10 teams were going to be at the end of every year before the year even started. And I think the reason that landscape has changed is, number one, I think there's a lot more athletes that are good. Plus, they dropped how many scholarships you could give. I think it used to be over 100. Now it's down to 80. So instead of having 4 All-American high school quarterbacks on USC, you've got 1 or 2, and then the other 2 guys go to Oregon and Cal. Instead of all going right there. So I think overall, for the NCAA, I think it's been better because I think you've spread it out where every year
definitely, there's no doubt. There's no doubt.
Every year it seems like there's somebody new. A couple of years ago you had Washington. And the other question is this. How many games would UCF have to win in a row and for how many years before they ever got included in this? Because the one thing I do know is I didn't see the game because my team had a game on Saturday night, but the UC Bearcats are I think they had one of the top defenses in the country, and UCF put 38 points on them, beat them 38-13, and you could say, yeah, it's just the Cincinnati Bearcats, but it's a Bearcats team that was a top 25 team, and they have been off and on all year. I think they're 9-2 now, and UCF just totally shut them down. So when I look at that also, I'm starting to think at some point, shouldn't we find out if these guys deserve to be included or not?
I don't know where you'd slot them because I don't know who you'd pop out of there. But I think personally it's a travesty that a college football team in this day and age goes undefeated for 2 years, should they do that, and not be given a chance to play for the national championship.
Well,
now, the travesty may not be that they're one of the 4 best teams.
Right now, though, Steve, if UCF played Michigan, I think UCF could beat them. I think Michigan is a team that is defensively dominant, but offensively they're not a great team. And UCF, I think, could put a few points on them, and if they could slow them down, I think UCF would have – I would give them at least a 30% chance or 40% chance to beat Michigan. Against Notre Dame, I would give them the same chance because, let's face it, Notre Dame's played teams this year we thought they would blow out, and they didn't. But I think UCF, you could put in the conversation with at least number 4 and number 3, possibly number 2, because I still say when you look at Clemson's record and their resume is enhanced by what they did the last 3 years, not what they've done this year.
Yeah, so does the travesty, though, become that they should be one of the top 4 or that we should expand the playoffs to include more teams?
The travesty, I think, is always you should expand the top 4 because there is almost always, a team like this, a team that's undefeated in a smaller conference.
Washington State, I can't say they don't deserve a chance now.
You can't.
I can't say that where they're playing, they don't deserve a chance to play for. I mean, I think it's ludicrous to not make it an 8 or a 12 or 16 game playoff. And, there's this overprotection of the bowl games because I'm sure they're huge money makers. The big ones are.
They're huge money makers. I think the little ones are too for the people that run the NCAA. I think they're getting money under the table. I still go back to HBO Real Sports 5 or 6 years ago. did something about this and why they don't go to a playoffs, because it seems fairly easy to understand that the biggest moneymaker straight up for the NCAA would be to have a 16-team tournament or a 32-team tournament. You could have a 16-team tournament and still have the bowl games, but they're not doing it because of the payoffs and everything that the commissioners of the leagues are getting, that the heads up at the NCAA are getting to continue the bowl system.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know that UCF is one of the top 4 teams, but the fact that they're going to possibly end up 24-0, I think they deserve a shot to play. I mean, let's face it, you're not going to have 3 nail-biting games of the 4 teams that make the playoffs. One game's going to be a blowout somewhere. I mean, just like Notre Dame getting hammered 45-14 by Alabama. One game's going to be a blowout. So if you're concerned about UCF not being able to compete with that level, let them try. I mean, if they haven't earned a right at 24-0,
I still
if
think
they get blown out, I guarantee you one of those 4 games is going to be a rout. One of the 3 games is going to be a rout anyway.
I'm still telling you.
Clemson's going to come in hot, or Clemson's going to fumble it up, and Michigan's going to, or Notre Dame's going to come in hot. Somebody's going to screw up one game.
Ohio State got destroyed 31-0 to Clemson, I think, a couple years ago. When you look at it, though, I still think that if you had right now Michigan against Notre Dame, which would be a huge national game, and you had Alabama Central Florida, I think Alabama Central Florida might outdraw it just because of the Cinderella part of it.
Mm-hmm. That'd be 2 great games. I mean, because, the rematch of Michigan Notre Dame, and then now UCF being the Cinderella story, getting their chance, but that game certainly could turn into a blowout real quick because we don't really know. But I don't know.
Yeah, but you know what? Until you give them the chance, you don't know. And I'll still go back to this. The thing that set the NCAA tournament on fire was 1979, and it's because you had Indiana State, and people forget this, but it was a huge story at the time. Let's see if you remember this. Indiana State, DePaul, Michigan State were 3 to Final Four. Who was the 4th team?
Indiana State, Michigan, and DePaul. Michigan State and DePaul. The 4th team in '79. I want to say Arkansas, but I don't think it was.
No, Arkansas lost in one of the greatest college games I ever saw. They had Sidney Moncrief, and they played up here at the Riverfront Coliseum.
Okay, that's why I wanted to say Arkansas.
Yeah, in the Elite 8 against Indiana State, and if you remember Bob Heaton, I think it was Bob Heaton that tipped the ball in at the buzzer to send Indiana State to the Final Four. But 1979, maybe the biggest Cinderella in NCAA history, played against Michigan State in the Final Four. Who was it?
It wasn't UNC Charlotte, was it?
No, UNC Charlotte was 1977, and they lost a close game to Marquette.
Okay, I'm in the hunt. I'm in the right area.
Don't be Googling.
I'm not Googling. Who was it? No, I'm not Googling.
It was the Penn Quakers.
Penn Quakers, okay.
And they got absolutely bludgeoned in the Final Four.
Yeah, I know. It's a tough call.
But hey, this is the thing. Penn was the 9th seed, and back then there was only 10 seeds in each region. And if I remember right, I think, who did they beat? They upset St. John's and Lou Carnesecca in the regional final. But St. John's was the 10 seed, so it was a huge upset that they got there. But if I remember right, I think Penn beat like Syracuse and North Carolina. And North Carolina was the number 1 seed and one of the favorites to win it all. But I think Penn beat them in the round of 32 by like a point at the buzzer. But you had Penn and Indiana State, and even though Indiana State was the number 1 seed, they were still a Cinderella. Nobody had ever heard of Indiana State. Nobody's probably ever heard of them since, except for the year I spent there. But
was it more like 6 months?
Yeah, well, it was like 3 or 4 months. But hey, I have a short attention span, so things happen. And then you go past that, and then you get more Cinderellas. And the more Cinderellas they get there, the bigger it got. I mean, you had 79 was huge, and then 83, NC State getting in and blowing it up and winning the whole thing. It's not really the same thing because it's not a small school. The best comparison would probably be Butler when they made the 2 runs to the national championship games in back-to-back years.
Right.
Or George Mason when they upset UConn and were like a 12 seed and went to the Final Four. But I think that's what has made the NCAA tournament so special. And right now, there's nothing special about the NCAA Final Four other than you have 4 huge programs that are going out to see which team's the best. I think you throw the small guy in there, and I think you blow the roof off of this.
I agree. Like I said, they go undefeated,
And especially, what happens? We just watched Alabama play the Citadel 10-10 for a half. You know? They blew them out after that, but it's 10-10 at the half. So for everybody saying nobody can play with Bama, well, if the Citadel could be 10-10 at the half, and they're a 1AA program, I say when you get to the Final Four, I've changed my mind on this. Because if Alabama was one of the greatest teams of all time, they wouldn't be 10-10 at the half with a Division I AA Citadel team. And if they come out and put up the same performance against Central Florida, they're probably down 2 touchdowns at the half.
Right, and they're playing catch-up football, and then we have never seen them play catch-up football, and how well do they play catch-up football?
Yeah, and the thing is this, a team that's never been challenged, those teams a lot of times, perfect example, we'll go back to college basketball. Duke UNLV in 1991, that UNLV team was undefeated. They hadn't been in any games that were close. And then when Duke challenged them, UNLV fell apart at the end of that game. I mean, when you are undefeated and everybody's talking about you, and they were, if you remember, in 91, they were talking about that UNLV team being maybe the greatest team in college basketball history because they were blowing everybody out. The year before, they beat Duke by 30 in the national championship game, and then they rematched Duke in the semifinal, and I think Duke played out of their minds, but also there was so much pressure on that UNLV team that I think they just cracked at the end of the game.
I'm a big proponent. That's why you roll the ball out. So, I mean, like I said, winning a tournament, having won one, is 51% luck. I mean, because everybody's got the talent and the coaching at that level. It just becomes luck. And, Alabama gets some bad luck, or the thing is, we don't know how good UCF is. But 24-0, if they get there, I think they deserve a right to give themselves a chance to prove how good they are.
We do know how good they are. They're one of the best teams in the country. We just don't know because they're not allowed. Because remember, this is a team that beat Auburn last year, who had beaten Alabama last year. So when you look at the teams they've beaten, they beat Auburn. They've beaten a top 25 team this year. I think they had 3 regular season wins against top 25 teams last year. I mean, it's not like they've played nobody. And they beat Auburn on a big stage, and I know people are going to say, well, Auburn probably wasn't pumped up to play in, a New Year's Day bowl game. But, I mean, Auburn hadn't been in a whole lot of them lately, so I think they probably were. And Central Florida was still able to get the win. And there's a lot to be said for guys that just win. I mean, somebody that's undefeated is like the 72 Dolphins. Really, if you want to be honest, when you sit down, they have to be the greatest team of all time because they never lost. Now, you look at the schedule, say that, but you can't show me where they lost. You could show me where the 84 49ers lost a game. Even though they only lost one, it was a close game by a field goal to the Steelers, and the Steelers made the AFC Championship game that year. They got beat, which means they're beatable. And if you're undefeated until you're beaten,
you're unbeatable.
Number one, we don't know how to beat you because nobody's figured that out yet. And number two, when you've gone 2 years unbeaten, I think it gets to the point where it's not pressure on you. I think the first year it is. But the second year, I think that you just start to believe that you're unbeatable, and it makes you really hard to beat, even when they get behind. And they showed that this year because who was it they played? They were down 17 points in the second half, maybe even in the fourth quarter, and just found a way to win the game. And there's a lot to be said for programs that can just find a way to win a game.
Yeah. I mean, we're totally on the same page. I don't think they'll get in the playoffs. I don't think they'll get in there. I think so. That's sad. But, you know. But, yeah, I don't think they will unless somebody screws up badly. But I still think they got to get past Washington State. I think Ohio State may be out of the running really right now unless they just blew out Michigan.
Well, see, I think if it came down to it with one-loss teams like Washington State and Oklahoma, I think there may be a public outcry that could change and maybe jump them ahead of them. Because let's face it, Washington State is not like they're going to bring a ton of fans to the college playoffs. Not like, I mean, UCF traveled well in the playoffs last year. So I think if you get a little bit of a public outcry behind this and you get a couple teams up there to lose, I mean, because right now, if you're also the selection committee, you talked about it, it's about money. What's a bigger moneymaker, Washington State at Alabama, or Washington State against Alabama, or UCF against Alabama?
Well, I think it's UCF, Alabama.
Yeah, because we know West Coast teams, I mean, probably our listeners out here, probably at least half of them never even seen Washington State play for a minute this year because 80% of their games are starting at 11 o'clock at night on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So.
You're right.
But, all right. We're going to end the show with that because I always like to end the show with Steve's final comment being, "You're right."
Good point. Touché. Well played.
Okay, now you're just brown nosing and kissing ass. Knock it off. All right, tomorrow, guys, we will be back to talk about the college football playoff selections. What else are we talking about tomorrow, Steve?
We should take a look at some of the. This is a big weekend for college basketball. We haven't talked much college basketball. A lot of these teams are playing in tournaments. I know there's a big game between North Carolina and who's playing Auburn today, or two highly ranked teams.
No, it's Auburn and Duke today. Yeah, because Auburn is ranked. Game. Yeah, Auburn's ranked 8th. And the first round of the Maui Invitational yesterday, they beat Xavier in overtime by 8. So they're going to play Duke next. Maybe they can challenge Duke.
You got some teams struggling. Villanova's doing 2, I think.
Yeah. The whole Big East is struggling. So tomorrow, maybe we'll just do an overview of what's happened so far this year. And
just kind of take a look at the tournaments.
Teams.
And, do that, and then we can review the playoff points ranking, see who jumped and who moved tonight, and go there, and we'll just take it from there.
All right. So tomorrow we will talk college football, college basketball with myself and Steve. Make sure you check us out then on thegruelingtruth.net. You can follow us on Twitter at GruelingTruth or at Survive the Magic. You can go to the Facebook page, follow us there. Tell all your friends and neighbors about us because Steve's really a wonderful man. He's not really as arrogant as he sounds on the air where he interrupts me all the time. You're just going to have to trust me on that, but it's true. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap the show up for today.
Mike,
what?
Did you notice how I wasn't disagreeing with you there at all?
Oh, I know. I figured it was the only way to get you to not interrupt me when I tried to close the show, but then you still interrupted me to brag about how you didn't interrupt me. But remember, you can hear all of our shows on Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Steve Risley, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.